Hi there, thanks for watching. Okay, in this video, I'd like to talk about something that's very important in American pop culture and I think around the world, which is the issue of cults. Okay, and basically, we're talking about kind of like ideological or spiritual or religious groups that have very extremist, polarized kind of separatist features. And I'd like to kind of try to analyze that from the perspective of someone with cluster B. Okay, because I think there's a lot of cluster B psychology that goes into this phenomenon of cults, and it has to do with both the people that run the cults and also the people that are end up in the cults. Okay, because I think there's a lot of cluster B vulnerability. Um, and I'd like to try to keep analyzing things from the perspective of arousal dysregulation and dialectical discontinuity or degradation of dialectical processing, because I think that's kind of an efficient way to look at it. I'm not saying it explains everything, and also, like, maybe I'm just in my own recovery and my own exploration of cluster B. I'm sure that as time goes on, I may I may fall into maybe another way of thinking about it. But for now, I think it's really important. At least I feel I'm kind of stuck on this idea of the dialectical processing. Obviously, you might have to watch some of the earlier videos to understand what I mean by that. But basically, to me, dialectical processing is basically the natural, organic way that humans sort of reconcile sort of dissonant ideas, dissonant situations, dissonant points of view. Okay, and most of the time, I think we're sort of habituated not to really sit and reconcile dissonances. I think it's actually kind of it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of people. So it's kind of uncomfortable. And I think basically either a person has to be really inspired, like from outer space, to want to do that, or it comes maybe from learning, being around mentors or just having good modeling from parents, or maybe an uncle or a grandfather or grandmother. But I don't think that a human being is going to really make a practice of dialectical processing really naturally, unless they're just incredibly inspired. Or, you never know. Some young kids are so creative, and so some people are really very talented, and so maybe some young people kind of discover it accidentally in the course of kind of adapting to their classes, or maybe reading books and stuff. You just kind of, maybe you'll pick it up indirectly by reading a book or something, because some authors, I think, have kind of a tone and an atmosphere that sort of smells and feels of a dialectical processing, which is, the sort of semi uncomfortable, just kind of allowing very dissonant possibilities to just kind of hang in the air, just without resolution. I think most of us, we like to resolve things very quickly, or we like to just kind of dissociate from aspects of dissonance that complicate our thinking, and so we just focus on, we sort of reduce issues to not as many real features as they really belong to that issue. Because I think it's just our intolerance of dissonance makes us kind of dissociate factors of an issue that really belong on the table. You know, so with this idea of the dialectical processing and how it relates to arousal issues, okay, I'd like to kind of look at, I would say kind of like the most the hottest topic, I think, in the United States with regard to cults. Obviously, I think there's the Mormons, you got the Jehovah Witnesses, you got a lot of things going on, but I'd kind of like to talk about the Scientologists. Okay, I think it's a really interesting case. You can't really even start talking about Scientology, and you can't do it fairly. I mean, to really address the issue fairly, we're talking about really, really above average people in terms of intelligence. Okay, I think for whatever reason, I think because it has kind of sci-fi features, and sort of the whole ethos of Scientology comes with kind of a very futuristic, kind of a very geeky, I would say geeky and sort of sci-fi, kind of techie. At least it comes with that flavor. It kind of has that kind of aroma of being a little bit geeky and techie. I think naturally this culture, this subculture, is going to attract, I think, very exceptional people in terms of intelligence. Okay, kind of futuristically minded people. people who really get off on geeking out on really complex systems and kind of like exaggeratedly complex. The how would you say, the religion has a very exaggeratedly, almost freakishly, cartoonishly complex bureaucracy to it, which is sort of modeled on L. Ron Hubbard's interpretation of the U.S. Navy. I mean, he was an officer in the U.S. Navy, but I think because he's kind of a geek and kind of a super intelligent guy, he kind of geeked out on all the bureaucratic details of the Navy, and he just kind of blew it out of proportion, like he was on LSD or something, and just made this like kaleidoscope of just insane U.S. Navy inspired bureaucracy, which is just, I mean, it's hard to relate to that, but I guess you have to be kind of a geek. You have to be a real geek at heart to really get off on all the complexity and just almost like a laughably over complex and overly tortured, sort of like just a kaleidoscope of just insane, literally insane bureaucratic detail. And people get off on that stuff. I think anybody who has a mind for like maybe computer programming or just kind of technologically oriented, mechanically inclined, whatever. If you're kind of a geek to begin with, yeah, I can see how you really get off on that. It's sort of almost like a kind of like a delicious delight for people who really love that kind of geek thinking. But that's not really where the problem lies with Scientology. That's just kind of that's maybe the fun part for the people that are into that, just the absurd level of bureaucratic complexity. But I think where you really run into problem is that with L. Ron Hubbard himself, who really inspired this whole thing and really did create truly a culture of personality, just revolving around him, as though he were a uniquely inspired, I would say really a prophet. I mean, they don't use the word prophet, but they operate as though he were a prophet. Okay, so already you have not just the idea he's exceptional, but the idea he's supreme in the, I would say, the gifts of wisdom that he received, from wherever he received them. They believe that, and so that's like, to me, that's like Saint Paul of Tarsus for the Christians. Saint Paul got the blinding light. He was blinded on his way to Damascus. And whatever he got, that is the word of God, and every letter he wrote is now the word of God in the Bible. Imagine that, like the majority of the New Testament of the Bible is actually the equivalent of like emails, written by some, I'm sorry, fanatically inspired, really polarizing person called Paul of Tarsus. And today Christians, truly, doctrinal Christians, I mean, the backbone of their theology is whatever Paul said. However Paul interpreted the resurrection and the crucifixion, that is really the core, I think, of what is today Christianity. Not so much the Gospels. I mean, the Gospel is definitely part of it, but just to think that all that theology from Paul of Tarsus comes from the equivalent of a bunch of emails that ended up getting made into literally books of the Bible. I mean, it's incredible. And in the church, they'll say the Word of God. I mean, it's like, the same thing goes on in Scientology. Whatever got inspired into L. Ron Hubbard, they're taking that as absolute, the highest supreme truth, through their prophet. I mean, they don't say prophet, but that's how they operate. So in that sense, I mean, we're talking about mystical, religious, belief-oriented, whatever. And I mean, the foundation of all their beliefs is hinging on the divine inspiration or the supreme inspiration of one person. Okay, so that's even before getting into what they actually believe, that right there is a tremendous ask. To ask somebody to believe that one person received, the unadulterated supreme truth right there before you even know what the truth is, before you even investigate the details, that's already a problem. And what has to happen to a person that they can even literally slip and actually let themselves buy that, without even getting into the details, So the same thing happens with Christianity. I'm sorry. I know, there's been so many 2,000 years of culture. It's like it's kind of hard to break down the edifice we've created around the idea of Jesus and St. Paul. So that has a lot more, I'd say, cultural momentum to it. So it's not so hard to buy into it because it's so infused into the culture. But Scientology is very, it's very novel. It came in like in the late '50s. Maybe developed in the '60s, but somehow, these people are they're hooked on this guy, L. Ron Hubbard. So what is going on? I mean, it's like, and how can we understand this from the perspective of Cluster B? Well, obviously, it's not just Cluster B issues that L. Ron Hubbard had. Okay, he was much more than that. I mean, he may have had, very severe Cluster B issues. I mean, probably severe to the point of insanity. But he also had other qualities. Okay, we can't take away from L. Ron Hubbard that he was incredibly charismatic, and not to look at the charisma as just pathological. He probably had honest to goodness superstar charisma on some level. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people just laughed at him. My understanding is in the U.S. Navy, people just thought he was a jerk, just a crazy, goofball. But for some people, his charisma really works, okay? And it really is a superstar charisma. If you are susceptible to that kind of geeky, kind of, how would you say, the geeky world, the geeky, techie, sci-fi kind of world. I mean, there are people in that kind of temperament who are going to find L. Ron Hubbard to be just supremely charismatic. So you got to give him that. You got to see that as a superpower. And then, yes, he was super intelligent, and he really had, I think, the gift of the prophet. Now, what is the prophet in real life? I think in real life, prophets are people that have kind of uncanny insight, who have insight that comes from departing from conventional ways of thinking. Okay, so there are people who live outside conventional way of thinking, and they have insights that come from a different point of view that the mainstream of people will never see because they really live outside the mainstream in their way of thinking. Okay, so a lot of times you can't talk about a prophet without talking about insanity. So it's sort of a combination of the danger of their insanity plus the kind of the amazingness of their insights because they see things from so far outside the mainstream. So I think in a sense, if we look at prophets from an anthropological point of view, the way anthropologically we talk about shamans and witch doctors, whatever, I think in that sense, L. Ron Hubbard absolutely was a prophet. Okay, now I say that anthropologically. Okay, in other words, I don't believe for a second, and I think it's actually a joke. The actual content of his prophecy. Okay, it's actually a joke if you look at it like factually. To asking yourself, were there really DC-8 aircraft that looked just like DC-8 that were spacecraft that, how many trillions? I mean, it's a joke because he doesn't even know the age of the universe. The universe is measured like, maximum to like 13 or 14 billion years. And he was talking about, scales of time that are actually not even coherent with this actual universe, So, I mean, it was clearly fantasy. Okay. So I'm not measuring his content in terms of whether it's factually true. I'm saying that anthropologically, he is really a prophet, okay, in the sense that he starts from being so eccentric that he really does not see the world from the mainstream point of view, okay, and he offers people like really like eye-opening insights, that come because he lives really far outside the mainstream. So yeah, I'd say anthropologically he is a prophet, but it takes a lot of maturity to know somebody is a prophet, okay, and at the same time to know that it's just anthropologically that he's a prophet, and frankly, if you're really mature, okay, and if you really got your dialectical wherewithal together, you can probably learn a lot from a person like that, because he's coming from such a different angle and he's so far outside the herd, the mainstream. There probably are some interesting ways of thinking that could be very inspiring from what he says. Just like St. Paul, not everything St. Paul says, even though he was a polarized lunatic, basically, I think he was also kind of a prophet too. And I think a lot of his insights kind of have an interesting ring to them. And so it's kind of like, it's not like just because these people are maybe a little bit insane, okay? I think we need to come at it with a mature understanding that yes, prophets will be insane, and sometimes insane people have prophetic moments. I have seen schizophrenic people that will give you a mouthful of word salad, and then occasionally they'll have something that just comes out of the sky that's like, wow, that's actually an insight. I mean, from left field, it's like it comes from Neptune, and it's like, okay, wow. I mean, just a piece, of something, and then word salad again. So it's like sometimes insane people occasionally will drop an egg, like a golden egg, and it takes a lot of maturity just to take that and not, take it with a grain of salt and sort of don't get too crazy with it and just kind of like, wow, yeah, insane people have something to offer. But it takes a lot of maturity to see somebody who's exceptionally eccentric and even crazy, to appreciate their insights and yet not buy into, maybe, don't buy into it so literally, so absolutely. And yet many people have bought into this, like, I want to say religion, because they say it's a religion, but I think it is kind of, you know how would you say, do I want to say it's a religion? I mean, well, I don't know. I'd say for now, I'd say kind of is a religion. Kind of is a religion. It's a prophetic. How would you say? It's sort of like a prophetic, a prophetic set of beliefs. I mean, why wouldn't that be a religion? They talk about basically reincarnation. They talk about spirits outside of our mortal, lifespan. I mean, how could that not be a religion? I mean, that's supernatural, right? I mean, it is a supernatural belief system. So yeah, I guess we can call that a religion. So you ask yourself, well, how then can people buy into this crap? And is it all just L. Ron Hubbard's fault? I mean, he was clearly insane. I mean, aside from being cluster B, I mean, just insane, just departed from reality. I mean, I would say more than just cluster B. I don't know if he was schizotypal. I don't know if I don't think he was schizophrenic. Schizophrenic is not fair, but maybe he was borderline schizotypal, like close to it, or maybe just very fantastical, very fantasy oriented. Maybe that doesn't have a specific niche in the DSM, but I think a psychologist, without having like a cubbyhole for what he was, I would say I would put it on the schizotypal spectrum. Okay, combined with cluster B, kind of psychopathic. In the sense that I think he really wanted to influence people, and I think there is a little part of psychopathy that could fit with that. They really wanted to influence people, and he wanted to be regarded, I think, as very, very special. So people kind of give him what he wants when they believe he's a supreme inspired person. So I'd call that cluster B, sort of right there in narcissism and obviously psychopathy, but also combined with great intelligence, and exceptional charisma. So would I diagnose L. Ron Hubbard as, like, say, a psychopath or a narcissist? Yeah, I probably would. I mean, I think he's probably narcissistic, definitely psychopathic. But I guess if I wanted to, like, summarize his whole personality, I'd say he was also probably a genius, probably anthropologically a prophet, and I would say also something in the spectrum of schizotypal or extreme fantasy orientation. Extreme fantasy orientation. Way beyond just the parameters of a normal narcissist. Okay, narcissists have fantasies, but this is departed from. This is like off the charts. So I'd say it's almost like, if there's a Venn diagram between extreme narcissism and, the outskirts of schizotypal, I'd say, explore that. Maybe it doesn't quite reach schizotypal, but I would say it's pretty far out there. So then let's look at the people who followed this, and also a little look at Miscavige and the concept of going clear. Okay, because I think that's really important. Going clear to me, I think, is very problematic. A very problematic, what do you say, like a concept. I think it is a very problematic concept. So basically, I've already said that I think Scientology is probably only attractive to certain geek sort of geek-minded and hyper bureaucratic-minded people that kind of geek out on over complexity. But I also think that to be able to lose your autonomy and to just fall for the almost the outrageousness of what's being proposed, even before the content, I think you would have to be, I'm sorry, but you have to be, have some weakness in your own dialectical processing, okay, to even be susceptible to that group. So it's not just being a geek, and it's not just being sort of like, fascinated with complex things. But I think also, my guess, my guess is that, even the very solid and strong and very apparently very sane people that got into Scientology, I think they probably did have some arousal, I would say arousal spectrum issues, where they would tend to have just maybe a lot of hyperactivity in their arousal just in general, kind of like irritability, something that would prevent them from having a stable dialectical process. So I would say that probably, the people that would be the most susceptible to Scientology would be kind of slightly, arousally unstable, sort of unstable arousal. I mean, persistent through life, like pervasive arousal issues, probably a little bit of insecurity, probably a little bit of, intolerance of, a lot of dissonance, so people that just kind of irritable, intolerant of, discomfort, because you have to be a little intolerant of discomfort to sort of like dissociate, different factors on an issue, and then, sort of like not weigh all the factors, you know what I mean? Because if you put all the factors on the table of any proposition, it is a little uncomfortable. Okay, and I think some people just have very low tolerance for that, for that kind of dissonance. So I would say low tolerance of dissonance. So these are people that I would imagine. Oh, and then also some people grew up in that cult. Okay, in other words, their parents were already in, and they were sort of, grandfathered in as children. You know what I mean? So they sort of grew up in Scientology. So I don't know that we can really, heavily analyze those people. Although I would think, I'll just not talk about that because I think that's just a whole different topic. But definitely we're talking about people who I think are a little bit, weak in the areas, not all the way to diagnosable cluster B, but they would have some degradation of dialectical processing coming from an intolerance of dissonance and, some kind of irritability that would, all the things that interfere with dialectical processing. Okay, so then let's talk about David Miscavige. Okay, David Miscavige, I watched a video of him with Ted Koppel from, I think it was 1991 or 92, early 90s. I hope I'm right about that. And, basically, I could see with Miscavige, he's got poise, he's got presence, he's got some, I don't think a ton, but he's got some charisma. He looks like a leader. I mean, definitely has the anthropology of a leader. I'd say anthropologically, he's a leader. Um, he's very alpha, very forceful, very commanding. He doesn't look stupid. He doesn't look super intelligent, but he's pretty intelligent. But I can see from even the interview that he also has irritability. He's irritable. And he also seems to have kind of an uncomfort and a discomfort and an intolerance of dissonance. So right there's the recipe. He's sort of classic. And, whenever someone is intolerant of dissonance and has, a certain amount of, irritability, they're not going to have dialectical processing. Okay, and so they're going to end up being very polarized and very, very opinionated, and, sort of like polarized opinionatedness. And so basically, yeah, I think, it turns out that actually David Miscavige was a tremendous bully and extremely aggressive and very, violent, even. And so, it's fascinating to me how a person like that, under the shield of a religion, can basically be untouchable. And I guess, in our country we haven't really, defined like a set of crimes that really would apply to religious leaders. So it's always been hard to sort of, get religious leaders within the framework of the religious system as it exists. I'm sure if David Miscavige had actually sexually molested somebody, then he would have a problem. But I think he's been very, very, smart, and probably isn't a pedophile or a sexual abuser. So he's been able to sort of just, sort of stay out of the headlights of the criminal justice system, just because he's probably the most guilty of just like punching people. And so that's just kind of a random crime. I mean, it's sort of like, it's not really a high level crime to say assault and battery. So it's kind of like, just, if it was more serious, like child molestation, then he'd be in a lot of trouble. So, yeah. So then, let's talk about the state of clear. Okay, so basically, the way I look at the state of clear is taking everything together. Okay, Scientologists not only come to the religion with a lot of irritability and a lot of arousal issues, but I think the actual ethos of the actual religion is highly charged with a lot of arousal, like a lot of very antagonistic arousal, and I think a lot of lack of dialectical processing. Okay, so in other words, Scientology is not a culture that really tolerates a lot of dissonance. Okay, really, it's really the contrary. Okay, so then how would we see the state of clear in that sense? Okay, well, I look at two ways of coming to serenity in life. Okay, there is the serenity that's like the genuine serenity, where you're actually not like selecting away things not to worry about, because to me the true serenity is serenity that's arrived at through discomfort. Okay, and the discomfort of dealing with the dissonances of life. Okay, so basically, you get to a place of serenity, but through the counterintuitive path, where you start with discomfort. The discomfort of how things present in life. Life is just nothing but a presentation of dissonances. Okay, and you just sort of don't reject those dissonances. You just sort of let them sit, and you don't rush to process them. You just let them sit, and you just metabolize them. And that to me is the organic dialectic. So what I see with the state of clear is it's a fantasy of being serene. It's a fantasy of being above all the turbulence of life. Okay, but sort of like, just let's leave all the turbulence over there and just be serene. Okay, it's like not processing all the uncomfortable things about life. It's sort of like the shortcut. You see what I mean? And I think basically they just discovered, brilliantly, they discovered what I think a lot of psychopaths learn just naturally, which is that a lot of people do have in them, okay, the natural talent to just dissociate from uncomfortable things, okay? And you sort of fool yourself into thinking that that dissociation is actually a legitimate, authentic serenity. Okay, well, I think it is a legitimate dissociation, and I think that dissociation can be very useful and even a superpower. Okay, I think people who really know how to use their dissociations, I think they do have a superpower, but I don't think that's an authentic, entirely comprehensive serenity. Okay, because you get there by not dealing with things. Okay, so I think basically to me the state of clear, they just turned into a science, a method to arrive at the dissociation that doesn't come through the discomfort of the messy world. Okay, so like a lot of religions, they sort of idealize this higher spirit. It's kind of like, for them, the state of clear is kind of like the Holy Spirit. It's kind of like this very sacred spiritual place to be. But it basically is defined as just kind of detaching, from all the muck of the world. And it's sort of like it kind of idealizes, kind of a separatist idea of sort of detaching from all the grime and corruption, and just being, separate from all the dirtiness, messiness of the world, and kind of like, sort of leaving the messiness just to be undealt with, really. And a lot of times when you see people like that, they'll sort of have this idea. Well, you have the chosen people who have, the clean spirit, and then all the messy stuff. Well, that's just condemned. And basically, Scientologists, their idea is, well, we want to spread the state of clear around the world to save those few that are going to actually become clear, or we'll turn the world clear. But the idea is that if you don't become clear, you're just doomed to messiness. So they actually have a very pessimistic theology, and I call it a theology because but they're basically their cosmovision. I'll say their cosmovision. Their cosmovision is very pessimistic, because they don't see any hope in just being uncomfortable with the dissonances and the messiness of life. They don't talk about maybe just metabolizing those things naturally and arriving to a different kind of serenity. So I would look at the state of clear as a false serenity, and very much sort of through method. Through method, they're trying to arrive at what, for like, say, psychopaths and factor one narcissists, is basically just that serenity of being dissociated from uncomfortable things. So, yeah. The other thing I want to say is that when you become dissociated from uncomfortable things, there is kind of a release, a relief, and sort of a little bit of a euphoria. And I think they fall into that addictive pattern around that euphoria, which is an arousal dysregulation and arousal, what do you call it? Like hyperactive, like like an addictive arousal pattern, and so I think there are kind of addictive and cluster B issues around what comes out of their state of clear. So, thanks for watching.